Hi, this is Pam from the Hooked on Sewing. In this video tutorial, I'd like to show you how to make these jar cozies. These are for the ball, flute, regular mouth mason jars. Now here's some of the tools that you'll need. I like to use my acrylic ruler, my self-healing mat, my rotary cutter. You'll need scissors, a seam ripper, some pins or wonder clips will also come in handy. You'll need a safety pin for inserting the elastic, some matching thread, and this is my circle cutter from Fiskars. You can cut it with scissors or you can use this cutter. And then for the fabric requirements, these are the fabric cuts. I'll also leave them in the description and you can find them the printed tutorial over on the Hooked on Sewing blog. So the first thing that I'm going to do is quilt my cozy to my insulated batting. So this is my exterior fabric. Just pick a stitch. It doesn't really matter. I'm using the serpentine stitch on this one and I'm stitching the lines about an inch apart. I'm using my stitch guide bar there, my quilt guide bar, to help me keep them evenly spaced. And then once I have this panel quilted, I'm going to take my rotary cutter and my ruler and just trim up the edges a little. Cut off those threads that are left behind. And then I'm going to trim my thermal batting down. I could have also cut my batting so that it was, half an inch smaller than the size of my fabric, but I didn't do that. So I'm trimming down that insulated batting just to remove some of that bulk from my seam when I go to attach this to the bottom of the cozy. So again, top and bottom of the cozy, I'm going to go ahead and trim down the insulated or thermal batting. Then I will take my lining piece and I will lay it right side down on top of my exterior piece, and I'm going to stitch straight across the top edge and back stitch at the beginning and the end to secure your stitches. And then once I've done that, I like to open up my seam and then top stitch on the exterior fabric piece. That just helps that to lay a lot smoother, and it keeps the seam allowance out of the way when you go to insert the elastic. So next I'm going to stitch the side seam. So open up the fabric so you have your lining on top and the exterior on the bottom, and right sides together, fold up and match your side edges. And then again, just stitch those, keeping that seam at the top of the exterior fabric and the lining, which will be in the middle of this piece, but keep that seam nice and open. And actually, before I turn this right side out, I'm going to just finger press and then use my little wooden presser to help this seam lay flat and open. And then I will turn the lining fabric so it's right side out. And then make sure my seam is laying on the side seam there is nice and flat, and the top edges are all nice and flat, and my bottom raw edges should all line up together. Then I'm just going to use some of my Wonder Clips to hold that raw edge together. And I'm going to base stitch around the bottom edge of this cozy. So I just removed my stitch guide bar, and now I'm going to just base stitch along the bottom to hold all those layers together. So I have my exterior fabric, my thermal batting, and my interior lining, which is also a cotton fabric. Okay, I'm going to make the casing for the elastic now. I'm going to stitch about 5/8 of an inch away from that top of the bolt of the glass cozy. I'm just using, like I said, a 5/8 inch seam allowance and stitching all the way around the perimeter of the top. Now on here, you see I've got my exterior fabric, my batting, and I did not include the lining. I should have had the lining laying wrong side down on top of that batting piece too. So you'll have your exterior fabric wrong side up, your batting, and then your lining fabric right side up, all sandwiched together. And I'm just doing like a pinwheel stitch to quilt this bottom piece. And then I will pin or clip the bottom piece, which is a circle, the 3.5 inch circle, in place around the perimeter of the cozy. Once I have that clipped in place, I'm going to stitch that to the bottom to the side of the cozy. Now I just use a narrow, like 1/4 inch of a seam allowance to stitch this. I also shortened my stitch length to 1.8. And I'm going to stitch a second time around the bottom using a zigzag stitch. You could also use your serger if you have a serger, but I'm going to use a zigzag stitch around the perimeter just to help secure that and keep the fabric from fraying. And then once I have stitched that, here you'll see I'm doing my zigzag stitch around. And once I've done that, I will use my scissors to trim up any extra threads or fabric around that bottom seam. You just kind of have to finagle it around as you're sewing, but it will go pretty quickly. And like I said, I'm just going to trim up the threads and any extra pieces of fabric, uneven fabric there, and then I'll turn it right side out. Now you can totally omit the next step and not put elastic in your cozy. I thought it was necessary to stay on the glass, but it's really not, so it's an optional step. This is how I made my cozy, so I'm showing you what I did here. And again, you do not have to do this step if you don't want to, but take your 8.5 inch piece of elastic. You will have to open up those side seams in the cozy with your seam ripper first. So open up those side seams and then insert your elastic or your safety pin into your elastic and then feed that piece of elastic through the casing that you just made. Pull those ends out together and kind of stretch them really good so you can get plenty of the ends of the elastic out there that you have room to stitch over those ends. So kind of pin or clip those in place. This part is kind of tedious, so I'm going to slow the video down a little bit so you can see better what I'm doing here. Working with this elastic in such a small space is kind of tedious. So I'm putting a pin in it to hold it together. And then I'm just going to zigzag stitch across that elastic a few times just to secure the elastic. But like I said, the elastic part is totally optional. This cozy fits really snugly on these glasses, and I'm not even sure that you really need the elastic other than it is a fluted glass and it helps to narrow the top of the cozy. But again, even with the lids or without the lids that you'll see that I've used, the elastic doesn't help it either way, and it doesn't get in the way if I don't use it. So that's just an option for you to omit the elastic if you want to. And this is the cozy. I'm going to go ahead and stitch. I'm actually going to zigzag stitch over those seam allowances or the where I opened up the seam allowance. My seam on the sides there to insert the elastic, and I'm going to zigzag over those to close them up, and that helps hold the elastic in place so it doesn't shift around much. And there we have our cozy. Now to fit the cozy onto the glass, I turn the glass upside down and I slide the cozy over the glass. These do fit rather snugly, but in my testing, anything any bigger and it was just too loose. So it is best to fill this or to put this on your glass when the glass is empty. Well, thank you so much for watching this video tutorial. I think you will find it helpful. And if you did, please be sure to like it, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and please come visit me over on the Hooked on Sewing blog and subscribe to my newsletter. Thank you so much.